And the Pope urges the Church in Italy's southern island of Sicily to help Sicilians overcome bitterness and disappointment due to lack of employment opportunities. In the Vatican, I'm Linda Bordoni. Receiving in audience the chairman of Jerusalem's Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial Center, Pope Francis on Thursday reiterated his strong condemnation against anti-Semitism. Speaking to Vatican Radio immediately after the private audience in the Vatican, Dani Danal told us about the conversation.
The message the Pope Francis conveyed to me is extremely important. When I thanked him for opening the archives of the Vatican of the relevant period of the Holocaust for our researchers, he said very clearly that to open the archives is to make justice. And he reiterated what he said once, that the Church not only is not afraid of history, the Church loves history. And very candidly, he said that he knows, like in every other group in the Church, there are people and there were people that did the right thing and there were those that not. And this is a very important message. He was very clear in condemning anti-Semitism, the scourge of anti-Semitism, and stressing the importance of combating and defeating anti-Semitism. For Yad Vashem, which is dedicated to the memory of the 6 million Jews that were assassinated by Nazi Germany and their collaborators, this is an historical moment. It is the first time that the Pope receives in a private audience the chairman of Yad Vashem. And I think that by itself, it shows the world the importance that Pope Francis, the head of the Catholic Church, attributes to the remembrance of the Holocaust and the fight against anti-Semitism. In the last moments of my visit, of my audience, when we left and I presented the Pope with a present and he was gracious enough to present me with a present, he said, "Never forget you have here a friend." And I know that when he said a friend, he meant also an ally in the mission that we embarked on.
And that was Dani Dayan speaking there to Vatican Radio's Cecilia Mutual. The Secretary-General of the Commission of the Bishops' Conferences of the European Union, COMECE, reiterated on Thursday that from a legal perspective there is no recognized right to abortion in European or in international law. Father Manuel Barrios Prieto was speaking to Vatican Radio within the context of an EU parliamentary discussion this week entitled Global Threats to Abortion Rights, the possible overturn of abortion rights in the US by the Supreme Court. He reiterated the importance of protecting the right of the unborn as the European Parliament adopted a resolution to uphold the right to abortion in the US Constitution.
It's a resolution, and therefore it's not binding, but it's a resolution that worries us and that I think expresses a certain tendency in the European Parliament and the European institutions that is not favorable to life. And this is really what is worrying. The debate that we saw in the Parliament that makes reference to the Supreme Court of the United States and a possible judgment that still hasn't been made public, that's quite strange in itself. What I saw was this idea that to defend the health of the woman, one has to guarantee the right to abortion. And this right, speaking about rights, and obviously this is something that is totally contrary to the position of the Church, but not only of the Church. I think of every person that sees in the embryo already a new life, different from the life of the mother, that has to be protected.
How then do we begin a serious process of recognizing and defending the right of unborn children to life?
Well, I think it has to be a deep debate, an open debate, avoiding, I would say, stereotypes, and a debate that goes really to the question of defending life. Not only the life and the health of the woman, but also the life and the right to live of the nascituros. We cannot put the woman in contrast to the baby, to the child. I am sure that if a woman is really free from social pressures, family pressures, professional pressures, economical pressures, I think a woman that knows what she's doing and what abortion means will never do this if she has other possibilities. So I think it's a big debate that has to be done And also, policies have to be produced that really defend the right of a woman for her health, but also the right of the child to live.
And that was Father Barrio Prieto, Secretary General of Comissé, speaking there to Father Benedict Mayaki. Ukrainian forces claimed on Thursday to have pushed forward in intense street fighting in the eastern city of Severodonetsk, but said their only hope to turn the tide was more artillery to offset Russia's massive firepower. In the south, Ukraine's defense ministry said it had captured new ground in a counterattack in Kherson province, targeting the biggest swath of territory Russia has seized since its invasion in February. The battle amid the ruins of Severodonetsk, a small industrial city, has become one of the war's bloodiest, with Russia concentrating its invasion force there. Both sides say they have inflicted massive casualties. Preparations are in full swing in Juba, the capital city of South Sudan, that is preparing to welcome Pope Francis from the 5th to the 7th of July. The Pope has described his visit to the world's youngest nation, torn by political strife, ethnic conflict, poverty and injustice, as an ecumenical pilgrimage. He visits, in fact, together with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Reverend Justin Welby, and with the moderator of the Church of Scotland, Ian Greenstreels. Speaking to Vatican Radio, Father Jim Green, president of the Solidarity with South Sudan network of religious established to accompany the struggling and divided nation, highlighted the need for a united approach.
There is a growing enthusiasm about the Pope's visit. The bishops first invited the Pope to come in 2016. In 2017, he was unable to come because of some security concerns. The Pope's commitment to South Sudan is well documented, and his ecumenical approach to it is very well documented. And that beautiful meeting that he had in Santa Marta in 2019. And we see this as a continuation of the Pope's personal commitment, but also I think of the commitment of the Catholic Church and of other churches to this promotion of peace in the country. It is not simply getting political leaders to talk, but it is how to help people to be more peaceful in their hearts and in their relationships with others. So addressing their traumas, addressing their difficulties. I think there's a sense of hope that the Pope's personal commitment will assist the churches here to continue in that direction. We'll continue to pray for the Pope, first of all, that he makes it with his health issues, and secondly, that after the Pope's visit, that the churches will continue to be engaged in our country and in our situation here.
Amongst the religious present in South Sudan, providing spiritual and pastoral guidance, as well as development projects, are the Comboni missionaries. Father Luis Oko is the Combonian provincial in the nation. He agrees that the need to overcome division in an ecumenical way is at the heart of the upcoming apostolic visit.
This has a strong message to the country that helps us to coexist together. It helps us to share our faith, in spite of our differences. It helps us to look at the others with respect. It helps us to appreciate the other people who have a different faith altogether. No? So I think it is so important in that aspect. In the aspect that it helps us to break the boundaries which has been maybe in the course of history has been built, whereby maybe we look at each other with hesitation, but now their journey together will tell us that we are one. And this is the prayer of Jesus for his disciples, that we may be one. So it's a journey that is going to help us to live unity, to walk towards unity, and to be one together.
And that was Father Luis Oko, the Combonian provincial in South Sudan, speaking there to Francesca Sabatinelli. The United Nations have condemned the fatal shooting of a World Health Organization employee in eastern Myanmar. It's the latest in a string of assassinations underlining the chaos in the country since last year's coup. The UN said the WHO said Myo Min Hut, a WHO driver, was shot dead on Wednesday while riding his motorcycle in Mon State, close to Thailand, in unclear circumstances. And the Philippine President-elect Ferdinand Marcos met with a top U.S. official in Manila on Thursday. The meeting, according to observers, was to affirm efforts to preserve an alliance strained by incumbent leader Rodrigo Duterte's animosity towards Washington and his embrace of Beijing. Through the South Asian country has a defense treaty with the United States, their ties were left shaken by Duterte's recent overtures to China. And finally, Pope Francis met today with the bishops and priests of the Italian island of Sicily. He urged them to show tenderness to the many Sicilians who taste bitterness and disappointment due to lack of employment opportunities. Devin Watkins reports.
The bishops and priests of Sicily met with Pope Francis on Thursday in the Vatican, who encouraged them in their mission to lift up their compatriots. The Pope noted that the Italian island has historically acted as a waypoint for the movement of peoples who sometimes came as conquerors and at other times as migrants. Each wave of people has left its mark on the local culture. He noted that Sicily expresses a host of contradictions where great virtues are present alongside cruel brutality. The Pope lamented that many children avoid schooling and turn to a life of crime as a result of high youth unemployment rates, which hover near 50%.
L'attuale situazione sociale della Sicilia è in netta regressione da anni.
The current situation in Sicily has been in decline for years, he said. One sign is the depopulation of the island due to low birth rates and mass immigration of young people who leave to find work elsewhere. In response to this difficult situation, Pope Francis urged the priests and bishops of Sicily to dedicate themselves completely and exclusively to proclaiming the gospel of Christ in the midst of an epochal change. He said Sicilians recall the many heroic examples of Christians who pushed back against the mafia and showed Christ's love for the island.
In Sicilia si guarda ancora I sacerdoti come guide spirituali e morali.
This is why people in Sicily still look to priests as spiritual and moral guides, he said. Sicilians have a high and demanding expectation of priests. The Pope therefore encouraged Sicily's priests to welcome the challenge of ministering to those who stay on the island. Feelings of bitterness and disappointment prevail among the people of Sicily due to the distance that separates them from the richer and more developed parts of Italy and Europe, he said. Therefore, added the Pope, pastors are called to fully embrace the life of this people and speak on behalf of justice, reconciliation, honesty, and forgiveness. He said the traits which should mark them out include closeness, compassion, and tenderness. I'm Devin Watkins.
That brings us to the end of this edition of Vatican and World News. Join us tomorrow at the same time for more. My thanks go to Bruno Orti in studio in the Vatican. I'm Linda Bordoni. Bye-bye.
The church is in Africa at the service of reconciliation, peace and justice. The church is in Africa at the service of reconciliation, peace and justice.
This is the Africa service of Vatican Radio.
Welcome to our half-hour daily program for Africa.
In today's program, you can hear our feature Culture and Society and News for Young People. First, however, our bulletin of church news, followed by African News Panorama. I am Festus Tarawali. Pope Francis on Thursday received an audience in the Vatican, the bishops and priests of the Italian island of Sicily. In his address, he urged them to draw near and show tenderness to the many Sicilians who taste bitterness and disappointment due to a lack of employment opportunities. Devin Watkins reports.
The bishops and priests of Sicily met with Pope Francis on Thursday in the Vatican, who encouraged them in their mission to lift up their compatriots. The Pope noted that the Italian island has historically acted as a waypoint for the movement of peoples who sometimes came as conquerors and at other times as migrants. Each wave of people has left its mark on the local culture. He noted that Sicily expresses a host of contradictions where great virtues are present alongside cruel brutality. The Pope lamented that many children avoid schooling and turn to a life of crime as a result of high youth unemployment rates, which hover near 50%.
L'attuale situazione sociale della Sicilia è in netta regressione da anni.
The current situation in Sicily has been in decline for years, he said. One sign is the depopulation of the island due to low birth rates and mass immigration of young people who leave to find work elsewhere. In response to this difficult situation, Pope Francis urged the priests and bishops of Sicily to dedicate themselves completely and exclusively to proclaiming the gospel of Christ in the midst of an epochal change. He said Sicilians recall the many heroic examples of Christians who pushed back against the mafia and showed Christ's love for the island.
In Sicilia si guarda ancora i sacerdoti come guide spirituali e morali.
This is why people in Sicily still look to priests as spiritual and moral guides, he said. Sicilians have a high and demanding expectation of priests. The Pope therefore encouraged Sicily's priests to welcome the challenge of ministering to those who stay on the island. Feelings of bitterness and disappointment prevail among the people of Sicily due to the distance that separates them from the richer and more developed parts of Italy and Europe, he said. Therefore, added the Pope, pastors are called to fully embrace the life of this people and speak on behalf of justice, reconciliation, honesty, and forgiveness. He said the traits which should mark them out include closeness, compassion, and tenderness. I'm Devin Watkins.
Earlier, the Pope received in audience the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, Mr. Petr Fiala, accompanied by his wife and entourage. A Holy See press office statement said the Prime Minister subsequently met with Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, accompanied by the Secretary for Relations with States, Archbishop Paul Richard Gallagher. During the cordial discussions in the Secretariat of State, the parties focused on the good existing bilateral relations between the Holy See and the Czech Republic and on the role of the Church in society. The hope of consolidating and further extending cooperation also emerged, read the statement. The parties also discussed issues regarding the war in Ukraine and its impact at regional and international level, with particular attention to the humanitarian situation and the reception of refugees, concluded the statement. Pope Francis on Thursday also met with Dr. Danny Dayan, chairman of the Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center. The center, located in Jerusalem, is Israel's official memorial to the victims of the Holocaust, also known as the Shoah, the genocide of European Jews during the Second World War. Speaking to Vatican Radio immediately after the meeting, Dr. Dayan described Pope Francis as a friend and an ally in the mission to defeat anti-Semitism.
I just left the Vatican meeting with Pope Francis. It was for me a very special moment, and since I, like the Pope, was born in Buenos Aires, I'm a Porteño like him, and we spoke in fluent Spanish. The message the Pope Francis conveyed to me is extremely important. When I thanked him for opening the archives of the Vatican of the relevant period of the Holocaust for our researchers, he said very clearly that to open the archives is to make justice. And he reiterated what he said once, that the Church not only is not afraid of history, the Church loves history. And very candidly, he said that he knows, like in every other group in the Church, there are people, and there were people that did the right thing, and there were those that not. And this is a very important message. He was very clear in condemning anti-Semitism, the scourge of anti-Semitism, and stressing the importance of combating and defeating anti-Semitism. For Yad Vashem, which is dedicated to the memory of the 6 million Jews that were assassinated by Nazi Germany and their collaborators, this is an historical moment. It is the first time that the Pope receives in a private audience the chairman of Yad Vashem. And I think that by itself it shows the world the importance that Pope Francis, the head of the Catholic Church, attributes to the remembrance of the Holocaust and the fight against anti-Semitism. In the last moments of my visit, of my audience, when we left and I presented the Pope with a present and he was gracious enough to present me with a present, he left and I presented the Pope with a present and he was gracious enough to present me with a present. He said, "Never forget you have here a friend." And I know that when he said a friend, he meant also an ally in the mission that we embarked on.
That was Dr. Danny Dayan, chairman of the Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center based in Jerusalem. The Apostolic Nuncio in Kenya and South Sudan, Archbishop Hubertus van Mengen, has described Pope Francis's upcoming ecumenical visit to South Sudan as a celebration of Christian faith. In an interview with Archie Africa, Archbishop van Mengen said the 5th to the 7th July trip to Juba that Pope Francis is to undertake alongside the head of the Anglican Communion, Justin Welby, and the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, Right Reverend Anne Greenchills, is also about peace. In visiting the world's youngest nation alongside the Archbishop of Canterbury and the moderator of the Presbyterian Church, it's like the Christian world is coming together, said the Archbishop. The ecumenical visit, he continued, is a response to the question of how global Christian leaders can help the people of South Sudan in coming together and finding their Christian spirit. The Archbishop, who is based in Nairobi, also said that the planned 3-day ecumenical visit is also an encouragement to the people of South Sudan, who consist of different tribes and ethnic groups and who are in conflict with each other many times. South Sudan is the second leg of the Pope's 2-nation visit to Africa, beginning in Kinshasa and Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo from the 2nd to the 5th of July, and then to Juba in South Sudan from the 5th to the 7th of July. Father Jim Green, a member of the Missionaries of Africa, is the Chief Executive Officer of Solidarity with South Sudan, a network of institutes of religious men and women in favor of Africa's newest nation. Father Green, who lives in South Sudan, spoke to my colleague John Baptist Tumusime about the enthusiasm of the people in view of the Pope's visit to the country.
There is a growing enthusiasm about the Pope's visit. The bishops first invited the Pope to come in 2016. In 2017, he was unable to come because of some security concerns. The Pope's commitment to South Sudan is well documented, and his ecumenical approach to it is very well documented. And that beautiful meeting that he had in Santa Marta in 2019. And we see this as a continuation of the Pope's personal commitment, but also I think of the commitment of the Catholic Church and of other churches to this promotion of peace in the country. It is not simply getting political leaders to talk, but it is how to help people to be more peaceful in their hearts and in their relationships with others. So addressing their traumas, addressing their difficulties. I think there's a sense of hope that the Pope's personal commitment will assist the churches here to continue in that direction. We'll continue to pray for the Pope, first of all, that he makes it with his health issues, and secondly, that after the Pope's visit, that the churches will continue to be engaged in our country and in our situation here.
That was Missionary of Africa, Father Jim Green, and Chief Executive Officer of Solidarity with South Sudan. You're tuned to the Africa service of Vatican Radio.
African News Panorama.
The Eswatini army has said that those who participated in pro-democracy protests last July will not be enrolled in the military in the ongoing recruitment, the Times of Swaziland website has reported. The report quoted a senior army officer as saying that it would be wrong to recruit people who would then turn guns against army officers. Police Commander Sergeant Damsang Kandov said the army would receive CCTV footage in order to check if any of those who have applied to be recruited participated in the protests. Civil society and opposition groups have been protesting to demand political reforms in the small southern African kingdom that is the continent's last absolute monarchy. Kenya's electoral agency says an ongoing audit of its voters' roll has found the names of nearly 250,000 deceased voters on the register. Nearly 500,000 more voters were found to have duplicate records, and more than 226,000 people were registered using documents that do not belong to them. Others had registered with invalid documents, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission said in a statement on the anomalies that affect more than 1 million people. The chairman of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission said that because of the implementation of the preliminary audit findings, the commission would delay certifying the final register for publication. The commission said earlier that it would publish the register of voters on or before 9th June, but has pushed that to June 20th as it seeks to address the findings by KPMG, the firm contracted to do the audit. Electoral irregularities in past elections in Kenya have led to deadly violence. This year's election will be held on 9th August. David Mwaure, George Wajakoya, Raila Odinga, and William Ruto are the 4 presidential candidates that are cleared to run in the election. Irish airline Ryanair says it is standing by its decision to make South Africans traveling to the United Kingdom to take a test in the Afrikaans language. It defended its position, saying airlines operating to the United Kingdom face fines of up to 2,500 United States dollars per passenger for anyone who travels illegally into the country. The airline has faced condemnation for requiring South Africans to take the test. Many black South Africans associate Afrikaans with white minority rule when they were forced to learn the language. Afrikaans is one of South Africa's 11 official languages and is spoken by an estimated 13% of the population as their mother tongue. You are tuned to the Daily Africa service of Vatican Radio. This is Couch and Society, and welcome to the program. My name is Kenyanta Godfrey Kampamba. Russia's war in Ukraine is seriously impacting many countries across the continent of Africa, as increased sanctions push the Kremlin to further explore relationships with countries outside of Europe and the United States. African countries are currently left with impending shortages in food and financing for energy projects. South Sudan is one of the countries where the effects of the Ukraine war has combined with unprecedented flooding and conflict to defeat the already suffering people of the country. Food prices in the world's youngest nation were already increasing because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but the war has now disrupted supply chains, resulting in rising costs for staples such as sorghum, maize, and vegetable oil. Fuel prices have also skyrocketed. The World Food Programme, WFP, in South Sudan is working to help make a difference in the lives of millions of people that are battered by a combination of factors. Matthew Hollingworth is the country director of WFP in South Sudan. Speaking to Diane Payne from the United Nations News, Hollingworth explains that the United Nations Food Agency is working around the clock in order to mitigate the harsh reality facing the people of South Sudan.
The overall numbers of people needing any form of humanitarian assistance right now, this year in South Sudan, is 8.9 million people, one of the highest people in need figures that we've ever had for South Sudan. Now, of those, based on the main assessment that we use to look at food insecurity in a country, there are 7.74 million people who will face severe levels of acute food insecurity this lean season. So from April through to July, right now, basically. That's 63% of the population of this country. Those are some of the worst figures we've ever had. Certainly, since this country was born as an independent state in 2011. What's caused it, or what's causing it, because there's more than one cause, is clearly the amount of violence that this country still sees on a daily basis and, the accumulation of that violence over many years. We've had 3 years of unprecedented flooding, and we're going into a 4th year. You're talking about a natural disaster, a shock that has changed the wetlands of this country. So agriculturalists and pastoralists who have basically survived, lived, sustained themselves through the same farming roles for generations can no longer do so because their land has changed forever. It's now underwater. And so we have issues of conflict being created because, for example, pastoralists, along with their animals, have been displaced for extensive periods into other territory where other people live or have lived, and now they have, as it were, unwelcome guests into a 4th year. We've also seen massive costs increases on commodities, primarily because of COVID and what COVID did to supply chains. More recently, we've had the fuel cost increase, which is certainly having an impact on the cost of food. And the last point, of course, is that, yes, the war in Ukraine and what that's doing to food prices and fuel prices globally and how that impacts on the South Sudanese.
So let's go into that because, of course, this is a very, as you've just explained, there's so many layers to what is happening there in South Sudan, affecting millions of people. And now, of course, the war in Ukraine.
South Sudan, like every country in the world, every country where significant numbers of people are vulnerable to the levels of food insecurity and poverty that unfortunately is persistent here, they will suffer because of what's happening in the Ukraine. Between Russia and the Ukraine, they represent about 30% of the world's cereals exports. That's enormous. That means so many countries in the world that rely on importing cereals from both Russia and the Ukraine, if that transaction of commodity is it has an impact on the price of what is typically a staple of diets across the world. In South Sudan, that's not the mainstay of diet. The mainstay of diets is maize. But the thing is, and if prices go, if availability goes down, then the price of sorghum and maize goes up as a ripple effect from what's happening in the Ukraine. And we're already seeing an increasing price of sorghum and maize in the country. We're seeing a very significant increase on vegetable oil already, 15% since the beginning of the year. And again, South Sudan doesn't necessarily eat the high-cost sunflower oil that is produced in the Ukraine and is not being exported because of the crisis, as it usually would be. But the vegetable oil here still is going up in price because globally there's less available, or there's a fear that there's less available in the future, so the prices are going up. What we're also seeing is the cost of delivery going up. The cost of fuel is going up. The costs of flying our aircraft, whether it's helicopters to move humanitarian personnel around or large food for airdrops around, that price has gone up to an extent that we are seeing at least a $300,000 per month additional cost. And of course, the vast majority of what is moved for the humanitarian community is by truck when we can, outside of the rainy season. Those prices have gone up by $1 million a month. That's based on today's increased price. So if fuel prices like diesel and benzene, what you call gas, if those prices continue as they are just today, that will be $8 million more required just to move our trucks around the country this year. But what it looks like is those prices are going to continue to rise. And so we're seeing food prices increase and we're seeing fuel prices increase. And that's going to have an impact on our operations as the World Food Programme, but it's going to have an impact on the market and how the private sector delivers. It's going to have an impact on the rest of the humanitarian and development community. And that impact, unfortunately, means that food prices in any market in this country will go up.
Right. So there's two issues here. I mean, we have the local people who the sorghum and other commodity prices rising ridiculously. And then for WFP, those astronomical transport costs. I mean, how on earth are you going to be able to sustain this?
Right now, we know we can't. And even those numbers sound big, but they are dwarfed by what we actually need to support those huge numbers of people in need in South Sudan. We are currently $600 million short for our programs for the next 6 months. Because this is one of the other impacts of crises like Ukraine, that there are so many mega crises in the world today, in the Ukraine, in Yemen, now in the Eastern Horn because of the drought. The Syria refugee crisis continues. Ethiopia, the Tigray crisis continues. The situation for the Sudanese continues in the north. We have all of these crises. And what it means is that donors don't have the resources to meet the enormity of the humanitarian needs in the world. So one of the other impacts is going to be that simply we will not see the levels of funding that we have perhaps seen in the past this year. Ukraine is an era-defining crisis. It is, suffice it to say, going to have an impact everywhere.
Given all of these costs, this rise in costs, what steps is WFP taking?
Look, we are calling on donors, I mean, in particular in South Sudan, to recognize that, first of all, this is still the youngest nation in the world, and it's in a pretty fragile state. We are getting towards the end of what has been a very difficult, unstable transitional period. We have a transitional government of national unity brought together by the various parties who were fighting one another off and on for the last sort of 7 years. And so that's definitely fraught with danger. That political agreement could break. And we're coming to the culmination of it. And of course, what's happening right as we come to the end of it is this enormous instability, because we're seeing poverty levels and we're seeing humanitarian needs, at levels we've never seen before. So on the one hand, we are saying to donors, let's be cognizant of the fact that this country, that was only really birthed 10 years ago, is in a very precarious situation. What we can't do is let a humanitarian crisis in this country sort of put us back in the wrong track, harm the peace process even further. And remember, we're seeing, conflict all the time still in South Sudan. 44,000 people were displaced last week because of fighting in Unity State.
World Food Program Country Director in South Sudan, Matthew Hollingwood, talking to Dan Payne about the World Food Program working around the clock in order to help alleviate the suffering of the people of South Sudan, who are battered by a myriad of factors, including the war in Ukraine, floods, and internal conflict. And that is all we have time for in this edition of Culture and Society. Until next week at the same time, my name is Kanyanta Godfrey Kampamba.
And now, news for young people.
Hello and welcome to the program. I am Festus Tarawali. In this week's edition, we look at an initiative on environmental education for young people in Sierra Leone promoted by the Salesian missionaries. The Climate Club in Lunge, a small coastal town in the Potloko district of the northern province of Sierra Leone, was recently launched by Father Philip Boa. According to the Salesian of Don Bosco, the club will be open to more than 6,000 youth in the local Salesian schools and youth center in Lunge, and will have a focus on environmental education and other related activities. Father Boa says while there have been some initiatives launched by the government, such as the last Saturday of the month clean up exercise, the environment does not stay clean for long. Therefore, he says, his aim is to teach children how to care for the environment and instill in them the knowledge of why it is so important in order to have the greatest long-term impact. It occurred to me that people may litter because they have never been taught to care about the environment. So this is the time now to teach our young people If we teach them in schools, they will go and teach others as they go to universities or back home with their parents, said the priest. They will be able to share about the climate club, what they are learning, and the importance of not destroying the environment. The young people have to be the ambassadors, said the Salesian priest. The Climate Club will run 3 days a week and offer youth educational sessions and activities that will teach young people about the environment and allow them to put lessons into action, he says. As an incentive to take part, Father Boa adds that youth who become ambassadors will be eligible for financial support to cover 50% of their university fees. The program will be facilitated by volunteer teachers at St. Augustine Agricultural Secondary and Junior Secondary Schools in the town of Lunge, where the country's international airport is also located. And that's all for this edition of News for Young People. Till the same time next week, I am Festus Tarawali. You are tuned to the Africa service of Vatican Radio. Praise be Jesus Christ. Laudetur Jesus Christus.
Laudetur Jesus Christus. Vatican and World News.
Orerite Radio Ecclesia, motori wa thuto le kgothatso ya tumelo.
Listeners who wish to make a complaint are encouraged to firstly register their issue of concern with the Director of Communications of the Diocese of Gaborone. Should it not be resolved in the first instance, you are advised to request for the complaint